On today's episode of the Locked On NBA Draft with No Ceilings podcast, Maxwell Baumbach and I are going to help you, the listener, better understand how to evaluate the center position in the upcoming 2026 NBA Draft with some of our best tips and insights learned from years of scouting.
You are Locked On NBA Draft with No Ceilings, your daily podcast on the future stars of the NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for making Locked On NBA Draft with No Ceilings your first listen of the day. I'm your host, Nathan Grubel, current No Ceilings contributor, evaluator of prospects over the last 14 years. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network and are available wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. Make sure to subscribe, rate, and review. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you get $300 in bonus bets. Download the FanDuel.com app to get started. Joining me this week is my co-host, lead columnist, and creator of the No Stone Unturned Ceilings for No Ceilings is Maxwell Baumbach. Maxwell, how are we doing today?
I'm doing great. We're talking about big men today. The center position is my favorite to scout personally. I could not be more excited about this one. I'm fired up to talk about the position, how it's evolving, and then some of our favorite prospects at that position that I feel like deserve a little bit more spotlight and love and discussion.
As Maxwell said on today's episode, we're going to go through some of our best tips and insights for scouting the center position for the upcoming 2026 NBA draft class. We're going to hit on some of the key skills and traits we're watching out for on offense. We're going to hit on some defense, and we'll wrap up by talking about some of our favorite center position prospects who embody some of these skills and traits, including Texas Tech's JT Toppin, UConn's Tarris. Maxwell might be throwing in another surprise center on the back end. Before we do get started, I want to shout out some of the other members of the Locked On NBA Draft with No Ceilings team. I know Tyler Rucker and Tyler Metcalf just released an episode covering one of the hottest names in the draft conversation, potential 2027 prospect, and Mika Murinen. And Corey Telba and Albert Ginn broke down the game of Duke's International Edition, Dame Sar. Both episodes are available to watch or listen to wherever you get your podcasts. All right, Maxwell, we're wrapping up our How to Scout series. In case you haven't been following along, you're more than welcome to go back and listen to some of the other episodes, both on our YouTube channel as well as our podcast feed. Maxwell and I have been going through our best tips and tricks for scouting different positions in the NBA draft. All the years that we've been evaluating prospects, we're taking some of those best tips and we're rolling those out across what's now 4 episodes. We've covered guards, wings, forwards, and today we're hitting on the big men. It's big men time, center position day. And I'm also excited to talk about some big men, Maxwell, because it's a fascinating position to evaluate. I think both guards and big men are, because as we've seen, time and time again, these positions don't translate as quickly, in my opinion, as you might expect, like wings and forwards, because I think a lot more falls on their shoulders than given credit for. Certainly some aspects of a center's game, for example, can transition early. Like if they're a good rim finisher in college, probably going to be a decent to good rim finisher at the NBA level. If they're a great rebounder in college, rebounding is one of these skills that we talk about all the time. Generally travels with you as you move up through levels of competition. But there's other aspects to the offensive game in terms of just how quickly everything's moving, how they're processing. Are they able to utilize some of the same passing ability that you've seen at the college level, translate that to the NBA? Is their screen setting ability really as good as advertised? Is that something that they're known for? There's all these different aspects. And then defensively, there's so much that rides on their communication and their ability to call things out for others, to where you can see big men get flustered sometimes when they first get up to the NBA level. You can see them get a little bit of foul trouble, see them get played off the floor, depending on different lineup constructions and how teams are scheming against them. So it's a fascinating position to evaluate, because I think sometimes, Maxwell, and I want to get your thoughts on this, sometimes we just have a little bit too great of expectations for some of these young players as they get up to the NBA right away, to where we got to just, pump the brakes a little bit, give them a little patience, give them a little time. But I think there's plenty of ways in which we can pick apart their game at the college level to see this is what's going to maybe pop right away. This is what's going to take a little bit of time.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. And I think you're so spot on about the center position bearing more weight relative to, like, if you are sort of a 3-and-D wing, and not to take away from what a player like a Jalen Wells did in his first season, where like he was really excellent for the Grizzlies. He did a great job defensively, like took tremendous strides on that end of the floor too, relative to what he was in college. but it's a bit easier to slot into that sort of a role. As opposed to a role where you're anchoring the defense, you're communicating everything. Mm-hmm. You were the one setting the screens. You were making decisions from the top of the key, or a point guard. I mean, like, look at the road bumps that a guy like a Scoot Henderson ran into. Like, it can be a lot when you're playing the guard position or the center position, and you are either anchoring or initiating on a more consistent basis. It can be hard.
100%. So what I want to cover for centers, some of my tips, and I think you and I, as we were talking back and forth off air, we were wanting to echo a lot of the same points. But to me, there's this fascination with big men to have some of these more perimeter-oriented skill sets. And it's not to say they aren't important and they're not separators. Like when we talk about the guys who can handle the ball and do a little bit more off the bounce, those are generally the centers who are becoming all-star or superstar level players compared to a traditional big man. Mm-hmm. But I think before you can even evaluate some of those perimeter-oriented skills, including even jump shooting, you need to be able to do what a center's responsible for doing. And that's so important. You and I talk about it all the time. Like for a big man, you need to own the paint on offense. You need to be either an above the rim threat, or you need to be a very consistent post-up guy who can lower his shoulder, bruise, make sure you're effectively finishing around the basket. I know push shots and floaters have been crucial aspect in sort of opening up a big man's offensive repertoire over recent years, but you have to be a consistent offensive threat inside the paint. And I'm not just talking like 59%, 60%, like these archetypes where you see they're not the quote unquote back down post up guys, even the rim runners. We're seeing these athletic guys who are high flyers, they're dunkers. These are guys, Maxwell, who are coming out of college, they're finishing like 70+%. Yeah, basket. Like we're talking elite finishing. So I think before you can even start to branch out into some of these other perimeter oriented aspects, you have to be able to own the middle of the floor. That's what scouts and coaches are looking at for you out of first and foremost.
Yeah, I did this column about Ariel Hook-Porty a couple years ago when he first went down to the NBL. And I did a lot of research on centers, and we'll talk a bit more about that as we get to some of the other skills later. But it was mind-boggling to me, like how simple it was in hindsight, that it's like, oh man, one of the biggest indicators is like, do you finish and do you stop guys from finishing? We're like the two most common through lines of centers that stuck. Like generally you want to be seeing at least one dunk a game, statistically, like Nathan said, usually around like 68% and above. And once you get below those numbers, you really got to start to make up for it in other areas, especially in terms of perimeter skill, or you've just got to be an excellent otherworldly defender. You got to really be able to finish, whether it is with that, ideally with a dunk, really. Like if you're going to be below the rim, it gets really tricky really fast. And I think we see it with guys that if you're relying on that push shot or a floater, that's just a higher variance shot by nature. And if you're relying on a high variance scoring method, it's a lot easier to fall out of a rotation. Whereas if you have something that's a little bit more of a sure thing, like just the ability to catch a lob and send it home, that can be a lot more reliable. But that's also why it's really important to look at a player's hands when you're watching a tape. How well are they catching the ball? Are they catching it, and can they go straight up with it? Do they catch it? Do they need to secure? Do they need to load up? Do they spring right off the floor with ease? Like those little things can tell you within the guys who finish well, okay, these guys had good percentages, but how scalable is this? And that's where you get into the little things, the hands, the time off the floor, all of that.
We talk about hands and feet with big men more than any other position in the NBA, and it rings true. A lot of those criticisms, we saw them, come about in a negative way for someone like Kaman Malawach last draft cycle, who certainly had a lot of fans, but there were some big time criticisms about his hands in terms of, how was he catching passes? Was he able to hold on to the ball when he was backing somebody down? Was he able to secure the ball, go up with it and finish at an effective rate? Or were you able to maybe, get him out of position, poke the ball away, wasn't always secure? How does your footwork work in terms of actually setting yourself up for some of those dunks, those rim attempts when you're posting up? Do you have some of those moves that you can go to down low? Do you have the ability to counter, drop step, all those fundamental things? And obviously from a feet perspective, you want to evaluate how somebody's moving in space. But another thing that gets tied into feet that also is, strength, it's physicality, is being able to set a good screen above the break. And honestly, Maxwell, it's something that sometimes we go back and forth. You kind of feel like it's a little bit of a lost art because you don't necessarily see it prioritized when everyone's talking about big men prospects. I feel like screen setting is one of the last things you get heard mentioned in some of our scouting circles and public social media, but it's so important to have a big man who can set a hard screen because it opens up not only opportunities for off-ball guys, but also on the ball and pick and roll. It creates that little bit of separation, especially if you're playing with a smaller guard who needs that screen to be able to create his own shot effectively. It just helps so much open up threes for both the on-ball player as well as other guys around him. And then if you have someone who, like I said, has the coordination, the footwork, the ability to dive to the rim, and then as Maxwell was talking about, finish above it with a dunk, that vertical spacing ability, you open up so much possibility for your team offensively.
Yeah, I like to look at, how guys are screening. Are they getting contact? Are they shying away from it? Are they holding it too long if they get contact? Are they quick on the roll? Are they quick on the slip if there's someone that does prefer to slip or gets out of there a lot? And I think the off-ball screening is a great thing to touch on too. I think it helped a guy like Yves Misi a lot, who is never the biggest dude in terms of measurements or weight. But you watch him even at Baylor, he did such a great job of just making contact on those off-ball screens. And I think it's something that really helped him get on the floor quite a bit as a rookie as well. And I think that can even dovetail into short roll passing and passing. To tie in, again, back to the research that I've done, I wrote about Thomas Sorber this last draft cycle, and one of the things that drew me to him was that if you look at the assist rates for big men coming into the NBA 10 years ago versus now, it's night and day. Offenses being more five-out in nature, relying more on, hey, we got two on the ball at the top of the key, let's dump it to the big, have him make a read or put it on the deck or whatever. You've got to be so much more capable coming into the league as a passer and a decision maker as a big man than ever before. That bar is a lot higher, and I need to at least feel comfortable about you being able to make basic decisions if you're going to be on the floor. And if you're behind the curve in that sense, then it goes back to the stuff we talked about earlier. You got to be an awesome screener. You got to be dominant on the offensive boards. You got to be an outstanding finisher. If you are taking away from that skill threshold, those other thresholds need to really ramp up and rock it up, because passing is becoming more and more important at the big man position.
100%. When we return to the Locked On NBA Draft with No Ceilings podcast, we're going to go over our tips for scouting centers when it comes to the defensive end of the floor. Stay tuned. Caffeine just got a flavor upgrade. 5-Hour Energy shots deliver tasty caffeine in 17 bold flavors. Each 2-ounce shot packs the caffeine of a premium 12-ounce cup of coffee, plus B vitamins and nutrients with 0 sugar and 0 crashes. What I love most is how portable they are. Big taste, tiny shot. You can take it anywhere and get the boost when you need it. When I'm on the road scouting games and have to make long drives after a hard day's work, I need an extra kick without all the extra jitters that I get from a typical energy drink. 5-Hour Energy gives me the convenient kick I need to get to and from and be ready to take on the next day without a crash. Enough with boring, flavorless caffeine. It's time to give your caffeine a flavor upgrade with 5-Hour Energy shots. Get the favorites you love or be bold and try something new in store and online at www.5hourenergy.com or at Amazon today. Thank you for making Locked On NBA Draft with No Ceilings your first listen of the day. All right, Maxwell, moving into our second segment, we're going to talk about some tips around how we evaluate centers from a defensive perspective to give you, the listener, some behind-the-scenes insight on what we're looking for in this upcoming draft class. Maxwell, why don't you go ahead, start us off, talk about one or two aspects that you're looking for out of centers on the defensive end of the floor.
Yeah, so something that we talk about a lot is being elite in just one area of pick and roll defense. Have one pick and roll ball screen scheme that I trust you to defend and out of the gate, whether that is switching, whether it's drop. You don't see a ton of like hedge and show stuff in the NBA. It's usually one or the other. Teams are sort of going to default to drop. Maybe they switch. That's it. Like those are going to be the two. And I need to feel really good about you doing one of the two. I think a lot of times you talk about guys being like versatile defenders, and it's like maybe they are in college, but I feel like sometimes versatility can just mean, hey, this guy's actually not NBA level great at anything. And I think that can be really tricky with defense. So when I'm looking for a guy that can switch, I want to see a pretty polished stance by big man standards already. I want to see a guy who can drop his hips, who can slide his feet, who doesn't get crossed up, and can really maintain a semblance of balance. A guy that's not going to be shaken too easily when they get inside. And then in drop, I'm looking at how you use your angles. What are you taking away? Are your hands in the passing pockets? Are you making sure that they can't lob it over the top of you? Are you cutting off clean angles at the rim for the ball handler? And are you able to force him into a tough floater or a pull-up shot instead of getting something at the rim? I think those are what you're sort of looking for on film. But I think the big picture question that you start with is just, what ball screen coverage is this guy going to defend in at the NBA level?
Absolutely. And I think that's important, in my opinion, because you need to be able to set the tone as the big man for your team defensively. When a coach is thinking about how do we scheme against the opposing team, you're looking at what can our big men do first and foremost? What is their specific strength? Are they a deep drop coverage big? Are they able to, hedge out a little bit? Are they able to switch? You're building your scheme around them first and foremost, because what they do well is generally what's going to help you either hide other defenders specifically on your team or cover up for their shortcomings. When you have an elite guard who might not be the best player defensively, you need to be able to figure out, what are our other strengths on the team? It's not just how do our wings and forwards switch, communicate with one another and cover some of those weaknesses. It's really the big men spot. How do you own the paint defensively? How do you give up the least amount of points, the least amount of penetration? How do you deter drivers and other ball handlers from taking over the paint and getting those easy looks, or those easy looks in terms of spraying the ball out to shooters and creating those wide open threes? How do you take some of that away first and foremost? A lot of it starts with how do you cover and communicate on the pick and roll? I think the other aspect for me that I really look at for big men defensively is owning the glass, right? Defensive rebounding to me is so important. If you aren't an elite rebounder, it's very hard for me to see you as a center in today's NBA, because the biggest thing about basketball is it's a possessions-based game. You need to be able to create possessions for your team, and you also need to be able to take possessions off the table from the other team. And a big thing about taking possessions off the table, when someone hears a phrase like that, they're thinking about how do you turn them over? How do you contest shots? But it's also making sure that you clean up that rebound on the defensive end so that you're ending that possession and you're beginning a new possession for your team. So I think defensive rebounding to me, how do guys box out? Are they lazy on box outs? Are they establishing their position? Are they guys who are relying solely on their verticality and their athleticism to win that battle at the end of the day? I think box out technique is something that's a little bit lost in today's league with just how athletic these guys are. Like, oh shoot, I could just, even get it on a second jump, right? I can probably just time my second jump and still, out rebound some of these guys that I'm going up against. But establishing position, again, knowing your angles in terms of how to seal off someone, establish, and then get that defensive rebound, make sure you're coming down with that ball and starting that new possession for your team, I think is a critical aspect that we don't always talk about in today's NBA, because, we look at rebounding by position. We want guards, wings, forwards, everyone to be able to rebound the basketball so that you have more bites at the apple. But if you have an elite glass cleaner at the center spot, it opens up so much more in terms of your transition game, especially if, they do either have that quick instinct to get the ball right away out to the point guard who can then push the break themselves, or our bonus we talked about with Cam Boozer last time on the forward episode. If they're an outlet passer, man, that makes it even more fun for an offense. And that's really how some of these teams are able to push the ball consistently up the floor.
Yeah. And I think even with the defensive rebounding thing, it's one of those things where, we are seeing more of it from more positions because it is more of a 5-out game. So you have more, secondary protection and things like that. But I want to see at the very least, I think, again, it's important to keep in mind, like, the standards are going to vary by what type of player you are. If you are more of a switch big, obviously, like, the defensive rebounding threshold is going to be a little bit lower because you're probably going to be out on the perimeter a bit more. So it's important to contextualize that. But at the same time, I still need to know that, like you said, you are taking care of your responsibility, if nothing else. I still want to make sure that you are boxing out, that your hands are up if you're around the basket after you are boxing a guy out, that you can, block him out, get your hands up, sword the ball, pinpoint it, get after it. And again, have those hands to maintain that ball and not bobble it around 3 times and let the other team tip it out to the perimeter or get a hold on it. It's so...
If you're switching out, right, and you're one of those guys who's maybe stuck on the wing, or you're even out along the baseline and you're letting someone crash in from the corner or crash in from the wing and get an offensive rebound, you're not doing your job, like you said, Maxwell, to box that guy out. Your coach is not going to be happy with you at the end of the day, even if you're not the guy coming down with the rebound.
Yeah, so I think rebounding, it's going to look a little bit different than it may have, 10 years ago. But I think it's, to your point, it's still exceedingly important that even if you're not putting up the numbers, that you are still doing whatever you need to do to help your team win that possession battle. And I think this is going to become more important because, again, like you mentioned, the turnover battle and the possession battle being so important, we're seeing teams crash the glass more now. So again, it's something that is kind of coming back in vogue. Again, it's going to be the ability to box out and maintain those boards.
100%. And I know we just went, a good solid portion of the defensive segment in this podcast. We didn't mention like traditional rim protection, shot blocking, but those to me, Maxwell, are such givens at this point.
Yeah. You should know that.
Yeah, we're going to talk about a center who I really like, who I'm deeming more as a small ball 5. I think that could be one of his best utilities in the NBA. But he's not one of these large block rate guys. Like a lot of these centers, if you don't have like an 8, 9, 10, north of that block rate, that's potentially a red flag just in terms of what kind of utility do you provide around the basket. You need to be able to, if you aren't deterring guys from driving into the lane, you need to be quick enough to be able to recover and ultimately get your hand on that shot and take some of those easy baskets away from the opposing offense. Like to me, rim protection, it's just such a given, because if you open up that lane and teams are taking advantage of some of those easy buckets, then you're asking other guys to potentially come off of their opposing players, maybe help in the lane. And then again, you're opening up those those kick and spray opportunities out to those open shooters. And then you're opening yourself up to even more threes than you were initially. So you need to have a consistent shot blocking presence in the lane at the center position in order to take some of that stuff away from another team offensively.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think that's I feel like for a while we got a little too in love with the idea of like guys who are theoretically switchable, and we kind of got away in a sense from the idea of being ready to anchor a defense and help at the rim, whether it's from the dunker spot or wherever else on the floor, just being that guy who can get into that position time and time again, or even if you're not getting all those blocks at the NBA level, just limiting how effective players can be at the rim.
Absolutely. When we come back to the Locked On NBA Draft with No Ceilings podcast, we're going to break down a few of our favorite center prospects in the upcoming draft, and Texas Tech's JT Toppin and UConn's Tarris Reed. Stay tuned. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I love using FanDuel as a sports bettor because they have an enormous number of markets to bet and things to bet on, especially when it comes to the NFL. You have same-game parlays, alternate lines, anytime touchdown scores. It makes it easy to craft a bet slip that gives you the best chance to win big. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. All right, our last segment for this podcast is going to be a conversation between Maxwell and I, highlighting some of our favorite center prospects who embody all or most of the things we've talked about today on both ends of the floor. So I'm going to kick us off, Maxwell. I had a top 35 grade on this player coming into last draft cycle. He ultimately decided to go back to Texas Tech, resume his college career, and maybe play himself into a little bit higher of a grade this season. Is JT Toppin, the 6'9", 230-pound forward/center. It really depends on how you're evaluating him in terms of where do you see him positionally. I think a lot of people are going to classify him as a forward, but in my opinion, I think you can get a lot of utility out of this guy at the small ball center position because of how athletic he is in transition, because of how good of a cutter he is. He's really become more of a post-up threat. He's one of these guys, again, he can finish above the rim. He can finish below the rim. He is a good screen setter and roller to the basket. You and I have a few qualms about some of his passing or quote unquote lack thereof in certain times, but he is someone who can play a little bit of a handoff game and play a little two-man game, cat and mouse, and find somebody. He has defensive utility in terms of defending around the basket. He can block shots at the basket. He can help. He can recover. We'll get into a little bit about some of my concerns with him away from the basket, but he's one of these players who I get the rebounding from him. I get the screen setting. I get the finishing. And listen, if I can unlock some of the jump shooting ability with him, he was 34% on catch and shoot threes last year. We get that number up to like 36, 37%. Now you're really talking about a guy who's bringing a ton to the fight. multiple utility guy. And he's the type of player that I'm looking at in this draft class because of his veteran leadership, his experience. He's helped command one of the best defenses in college basketball. He's been a part of a high-flying offense in college basketball who's only looking to take even more steps forward as we get into this season. You know, our guy Christian Anderson's set to make a big leap. They have some other really interesting names coming in to Texas Tech. I really like where his game is trending. He became a lot more of a quote-unquote hub last year than he was before he got to Texas Tech. He had a 31.8 usage rate, a 32 PER. This is an efficient player who, we talked about this with the wings and the forwards. If you're a guy who has multiple outs in terms of if one of your aspects of your game isn't necessarily working, do you have something else to lean on? I do really like where JT Toppin is headed just in terms of his versatility. Now, there are some negatives we have to look at here. I mentioned that he can block shots. He just wasn't an elite shot blocker. He had a 5.8 block rate, which is, again, that's on the lower side if you're going to be asking somebody to play the center spot. Maybe as a helper forward, that number becomes a little bit more acceptable, maybe even on the high side for a helper forward. But that's certainly an area where I'm going to look at for him to really improve on, especially as he plays that center position at Texas Tech and guards more bigs on the interior. He has some awesome battles that he's won when guys have tried to post up on him. He's had some battles that he's lost when he has to step out away from the basket, contest jump shots. Those percentiles don't necessarily look great when you're evaluating him on synergy. So there's aspects to his game that you can pick apart a little bit, but I know what I'm getting in JT Toppin on a night in, night out basis in terms of leadership, effort, motor, and utility. He's the type of guy I want to go to bat for. I'm not necessarily calling him like a lottery guy or a top 20 prospect, but I think once you get outside like the top 25 range in this draft class, Maxwell, I think even when we get to May and June, you're going to start looking for guys, especially with size, strength, physicality, who you can trust to do enough things at an average to above average rate at the NBA level. I think JT Toppin's someone I'm going to be looking at and saying, yeah, I probably want to rank you somewhere in like the top 30 to 40 on my board.
Yeah, and I'm a big believer in motor as a skill too. Like JT Toppin is first team guy you wouldn't want to play against. He just plays with such a hot motor. He's all over the glass. He's constantly generating putbacks, really overperforms his measurables and weight on the defensive glass in a way that we've seen guys scale up and find success with. And like you said, if that jump shot just actualizes a little bit more, which is important to remember, like that's solid shooting indicators for a guy, a big guy that age, like could really become a thing for him. But just the interior cleanup work, the defensive versatility, he brings a lot to the table.
I want to hear you wax poetic about your guy, Tarris, because Maxwell, I'm not just blowing smoke up your alley, man.
Yeah.
Like I really am with you in that he's potentially one of the biggest sleepers that we have at the big man spot in this upcoming NBA draft class. I truly believe that.
Tarris Reed is a first round guy for me to start the year. I just fully believe what we're working with here. We got a guy who's around 6'11", 265 pounds. So he has that physicality and he uses it. He pinballs guys around with his screens. Really great finisher. 67.1 true shooting percentage. Had dunk numbers that are where you'd want him to be despite being a sixth man last year. So when those minutes are greater, he's really going to be clearing those dunk thresholds. Gets off the floor way better than you'd expect for a guy that size, but still has that like real dribble post-up game. Can really fake guys, get to his spots on the interior, has that back down game, did a really great job relative to how he performed at Michigan in terms of taking his time and making sure his feet were under him before he went up on the interior. And a guy who I think has some real juice as a passer. Did not show that at all. I loved Tarris Reed coming into college, was a disastrous passer at Michigan, did not actualize at all. And then this year had an assist rate over 10. I do like how he sees the floor. I think when he keeps it simple, he does a really nice job. And then again, owns the glass. Offensive rebound rate over 17. Defensive rebound rate over 27, always boxing out, always getting after it on the boards. And a guy who can really anchor a defense. Had that block rate at 9. Like we mentioned, he can really patrol the lane and drop coverage, take away any easy options that an offense could potentially generate. But I think he did a good job out in space. I was surprised, honestly, at how often UConn had him like blitzing and playing in these aggressive ball screen coverages. And I thought
he was in a lot better of shape last year at UConn than he was his first year at Michigan. I think that definitely helped.
Yeah, like he can really sit down and move his feet. Like when I put together the no stone stuff for him, there was a play where he guarded Cam Jones out on an island and like really dropped his hips, slid with him, and just stuffed him at the rim. Like I think he has enough of that that he won't get killed when he has to guard out on an island in the NBA. And I really trust him in drop coverage. The big swing skill with him is going to be the fouling. He fouled a lot last year, got into foul trouble a lot in the games that he played big minutes. That's going to have to take a step forward. He's going to have to make a couple fewer mistakes as a passer. But I think all in all, like what we talked about, what makes a good big man: finishing, rebounding, protecting the rim, making solid decisions, setting good screens, owning the glass. That is all here. I know what Tarris Reed is, and I think it's an NBA player. And I think that there's some real like undershaded upside with him, given how big of a step forward he took as a junior in his first year in the UConn system.
Look, UConn did not have the season that a lot of fans would have hoped for last year, but obviously when we think back to UConn's championship history, we think a lot about the guard play, but those teams also had high quality play out of their big men. And I think Tarris Reed's the type of guy they're going to unleash him this year. And I think he has the chance to be a per minute monster. And if that's the case, if he's grabbing every single board that's available, if he's a consistent post up threat, he's consistently finishing over other bigs. And then like you talked about on the defensive end, he's showing a little bit of versatility when it needs to be, but one of these guys who I think is just going to feast and drop coverage and really just swallow up opponents as they try to go after him in the lane. I think Tarris Reed's going to have a big year. I think he's going to jump out as a stat sheet darling. He's going to be a stat sheet stuffer, and I really think he's going to emerge and pop in NBA draft conversations. I'm with you on Tarris Reed 100%, Maxwell, but that's going to do it for today's episode of the Locked On NBA Draft with No Ceilings podcast. Big shout out to each and every one of you for listening. The Locked On NBA Top 100 is here, voted on by the NBA hosts of the Locked On Podcast Network. Our top 100 was formed by experts that cover these teams and players every single day. Find the full list on Locked On Sports Today on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. As always, thank you all for listening. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week.